Hello, everybody, and welcome to Paddock Project. I'm your host, Tiggy, and I have a very special guest with me here today, Kurt Badenhausen. Kurt is the leader in sports valuations, has been doing that work for decades, led the charge at Forbes, and is now at Sportico, where Kurt, you just published F1 valuations, which was really fun for me and for I think a lot of F1 fans to dig into. And as I was saying before we hit record, not to embarrass you, Kurt, but the sports business management class I'm taking in school right now, the very first day, our professor said your name. And I was like, this is worlds colliding. I have to absolutely talk to Kurt. So thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, no, your professor is one of the OGs in this space. He's been teaching it for a long time, long before every university seemed to pop up with a sports management program. He's been leading the charge. So
Yes.
happy to join.
It's all the rage. So let's start. What made you choose sports as an asset that you wanted to value? Like, what makes sport so unique from a business perspective in your eyes?
Yeah, this goes back. I was just out of college. Joined a place called Financial World. My longtime partner in crime, Mike Ozanian, was there, and he had come up with this idea of valuing sports teams, and people thought it was crazy. Not crazy. They didn't understand what it even meant because this is 30 years ago. They thought they'd ask, you're talking about what the players are worth, or I don't get it. Like, no, if a team was to be bought or sold, that what somebody would pay for it. Again, this is 30 something years ago. It it wasn't an asset class, and people were like, who would ever care about something like that? I don't get it. But one of the big things that had just happened, Jerry Jones had recently bought the Dallas Cowboys, spent a lot of money on it, kind of opened people's eyes a little bit. But even back then, investment bankers didn't really think about it so much because they didn't see quite the value from an M&A standpoint in representing these owners. Their primary concern back in the 1990s was financing for all the stadium construction going on. They saw that's where the money was, lending teams the money to build new buildings, because incredible growth that happened through the 1990s in particular in terms of stadium and arena building. As the valuations started to increase, and these banks' clients started to be more interested in buying sports teams, the bigger banks started to get into it and think about it from an M&A standpoint. And then kind of the big banks stepped away a little bit. A lot of those bankers left, started boutique firms on their own, which and represent a lot of the deals that go on in the place. But now we've seen a reorganization and a formalization of some of the bigger banks like J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, who have done sports but are kind of formalizing their sports practices. So at Forbes, we did it. Joined Forbes. 1998 was the first year we published valuations at Forbes, Mike and I, and then worked together to do it for what back then was four major sports leagues. Eventually MLS, global soccer, started doing NASCAR, and we did F1 valuations, which got a lot of attention when we first did it. It was a much different time for F1. You had a few big dogs who were spending all the money and bringing in all the money, and a bunch of teams that were kind of struggling to hold on. And so I joined Sportico in 2021. And head up the sports valuations we do there. And F1 was one of those that I was so excited to do because so much had changed. Forbes hadn't done it for a few years, and it was great to kind of dig in and say, whoa, this whole series has changed dramatically since we last looked at it at Forbes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so much has changed. I guess for those listening, some context, if you're not aware, Liberty Media, which now owns Formula One, acquired F1 in 2017 for, I think, only about $4.4 billion. It's now worth over $20 billion. So, Kurt, let's talk about that growth. Like, as we saw in your recent Sportico valuations for F1, every single F1 team is now worth over $1 billion. What do you kind of attribute that growth to?
Yeah, I saw somebody's sports media predictions for 2025, and they predicted every F1 team would be worth $1 billion. They clearly are not reading Sportico because, as far as we're concerned,
Shame on them.
every franchise, not franchise, excuse me, every team is worth $1 billion at this point. Most recently, when we published our last valuations, the average 2.3 billion, up 44%
Wow.
from the valuations that we published. We didn't quite do it 12 months later. It was about 17 months later. And so a couple things have really happened. It's not all Drive to Survive, but that is a component, not to be ignored. But it is not the overarching reason for suddenly these teams being worth so much money. You need to give Liberty a lot of credit for their leadership and how they've steered this sport. And F1, for all the fans out there, I mean, it's forever been this kind of elitist sport that would race in Monaco and all these, really cater to that high end audience and kind of ignore the general audience in many ways, or wasn't necessarily concerned with monetizing that audience. And it was all about race day and the fans, the Paddock Club, and just really that high end clientele and Bernie Ecclestone, who ran the series forever, would really kind of thumb his nose at the so-called commoners. And what Liberty Media has done is a couple of things. One, they've managed to maintain this premium brand, make it a premium asset, but also turn it into something that is more digestible for a larger audience. And also, in particular, an American audience. Part of that is Drive to Survive, which obviously took off and created a ton of new fans. And then also the function of moving from one race. We had one race in Austin in the US for a very long time, moving to 3 races, and those 2 races in Miami and Las Vegas both just absolutely took off. Vegas race, of course, is very different because Liberty also owns the race. So if you think about changes on the race calendar, Vegas isn't going anywhere
Yeah.
because Liberty owns that one. So, and they invested a lot of money to create the infrastructure to hold races there. So that was a big part of what's happened. And they've turned race weekends into so much more than just what happens on the track on Sundays. You have multi days of qualifying and racing, but it's just all of the programming that goes around racing right now. I mean, in Austin with concerts and big names showing up and performing, and so you've got people coming. So it's not just I want to come and be on there on Sunday. I want to come for 4 days, and I'm going to spend money on all these different things that revolve around the race. I mean, in Miami, the race was like secondary or third on the list of just all the stuff that was going on in Miami. And I'm probably saving the biggest for last, really, because it deserves a little more time. Is putting in cost controls was total game changer in terms of how these assets are looked at from a business standpoint. Because for so long, the top of the grid, it was Ferrari, Mercedes, and now Red Bull recently, spending all the money, making all the money, and they were the only ones that could compete. Now, we've still seen dominant teams dominating on the track recently, but as these cost controls permeate further through the grid, and we get further away from the original hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D spending that went on, but before the cost controls went in, that certainly gave the bigger clubs an advantage right off the bat because they spent all this money over all these years. As that gap shrinks in terms of people spending money recently on R&D, you're seeing a hope that those teams that have traditionally been stuck at the bottom of the grid can have more success. Maybe not competing for titles, but make a podium each year. And then again, it changed from a sport where you had no chance to compete unless you were willing to lose $150 million a year or pick a
Yeah.
number, to now people look at it and be like, wait, I can make money and own a sports team, which again, those two things have not necessarily coexisted, not just F1, but across all sports. You've had
Yeah.
National Hockey League teams losing money, Major League Baseball teams losing money. Look around the global soccer ecosystem. Most MLS clubs lose money, but it's not just MLS. 75% of Premier League clubs lose money every single year. So, and that's the top soccer league in the world by a lot. But it's just with the Premier League does not have cost controls
Yeah.
that have real teeth to them. So teams spend to lose money because they're chasing titles or keeping up to try to not get relegated down to the second division, down to the championship. So the cost controls, absolute game changer. It led to private equity firms now looking at these as viable assets to put their money and not get hit with a giant capital call every year because the race team's losing $100 million. And just, Liberty has done a fantastic job in terms of monetizing this sport, creating revenue, and not dinging the brand, which sometimes happens when you try to reach a larger audience. But those ultra premium brands still want to be part of this sport.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are all great points. And on the cost cap, I totally agree that it's been a game changer when you think about it from an investment perspective. But I think one thing that's interesting about that, as opposed to maybe other leagues in the US, like the NFL, the NBA, et cetera, marketing and driver salaries are excluded from that cost cap, which is a very different dynamic. Is there a world in which it would ever make economic sense for F1 to impose a salary cap for drivers, or do you think this is working for them for now?
It's working for now.
Yeah.
We'll see. And so much of probably better than you certainly know better than most. The car is the driver here, so to speak. Driver.
That's very fair.
It's really on the edges in terms of the impact that the driver is having. So is there going to be a bidding war because there is some driver that comes out of nowhere that is, suddenly a second faster on every lap than everybody else because their driving skills are that good? Yeah, maybe. And maybe maybe it's worth it. But you have two guys at this point who are been paid dramatically more than everybody else, with Lewis Hamilton and Verstappen, both many time world titleists each, and have had a lot of success. Lewis Hamilton also comes with a certain celebrity vibe that
the star power is unmatched.
Star power is way beyond anybody else, any other driver out there, and arguably in a long time in F1. So there's something to be said for that as well. So I don't think F1 has to go that far. And this was kind of a palpable way to push through the cost caps and get the Ferraris and the Mercedes on. They still want some advantages, and this is one way to get at it. But listen, every sports league or series or whatever they want to maximize profitability as much as they can. So this is a little different because you don't have a union pushing back like you have in the team sports leagues in the United States, where they're negotiating against a league and trying to extract every possible bigger chunk of revenue from the particular league, and the league's trying to keep every possible dollar that they can for their owners. So I think the current format makes a lot of sense. Again, if you exclude those two guys, the delta between the lowest paid driver and the top paid driver, or I shouldn't say top paid, maybe the third highest paid driver in the sport is not that crazy different. So,
Yeah.
and again, as you have success, your paycheck goes up,
Yeah.
and you've
Makes
gotten to the
sense.
point where, again, if you take out Verstappen and Lewis, Haas or anybody can afford, the third, fourth, fifth highest paid driver. Arguably, I
Yeah.
mean, Haas might lose a little more money if you tried to sign one of those guys. And but again, hard to sign the third or fourth best driver if your car is not competitive. So
Yeah.
they have to be realistic in terms of the teams that those guys would ever consider joining as well.
Yeah. I think it's going to be interesting if the cost cap actually does tighten the playing field at all. I think hope springs eternal, but we'll see
Yeah,
if that.
absolutely. I mean, for
Yeah.
years, the top teams have been figuring out a way to just be better,
Yeah.
and so to your point, are they going to pour it all into somehow this driver mark, stuff outside of the cap?
Yeah.
It's an arms race. Always. And so if you can figure out a way to spend money to give you, because the margin is so small that if you can figure out that 1%, it's huge.
Yeah.
So the
Absolutely.
big teams are and the smaller teams, they're not going to, they're going to keep trying. They're going to, figure out every sort of angle. So I
Yeah.
don't know if, spending more marketing on driving, I mean, and that's kind of why those two things were kind of, well, I mean, no, I'm sorry. They were carved out, one, because you had existing drivers with massive salaries that was going to
Yeah.
be untenable if they had to fall under the cap. But also, you kind of just throw in the big guys a bone, and those were
Totally.
two categories that spending a lot of money in those two areas can help their business, but you could argue it doesn't necessarily help them on the track
Yeah.
so much.
I think there's a lot of truth to that. I want to go back to this idea of F1 as its own race promoter. I mean, all of F1's races are put on by local promoters except the Las Vegas Grand Prix, as you noted. And I think investors have liked this race promoter fee dynamic because you have these sort of long-term contracts where fees are locked in. There's an escalator, throughout many years. And so it's predictable revenue. And I think if you look at the analyst research reports, there's a lot of eyes now on the Las Vegas Grand Prix in terms of the attendance, the economics, what it's bringing to F1. And this past year, attendance was down. It's the second year, it's not the first. I'm sure there were many reasons for that. But that was maybe potentially counterbalanced by increase in sponsorship revenue and other things. But what do you think about the model of F1 as its own promoter? And is it in F1's best interest to take that role on for more races, or do you think that Vegas is special in some way?
I think Vegas is special. I don't think F1 wants to be in the necessarily heavy capex business, because to your point, the current model is great.
Yeah.
Just give us a big license; it all drops to the bottom line, basically, and we can focus on selling sponsorship, selling media, and making our money there, and then distributing what we do to the teams. And so I think this gives them a race and a weekend and a location to try things.
Yeah.
And so, again, do they do this in another city? Sure, maybe two out of, two out of 24. How many races are we up to this year?
24 this year.
24. Okay. So two,
Yeah.
could there be two out of 24 going forward? Sure.
Yeah.
And they'll have to gauge, you have to gauge what the demand is. Right now, the demand is pretty big to bring this series to your city.
Yeah.
And so they're able to command, increases in the current license fee if they decide that, there isn't necessarily a sensational demand anymore, and we can build a better business by doing all this ourselves. Maybe, but again, we saw with Las Vegas. I mean, particularly starting from scratch. I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's a hard. Things are going to go wrong. and you're going to get attacked for it. And so
Yeah.
I think again, who knows what's inside of Liberty Media's head right now, but from what I understand, this works great for them. Have this one.
Yeah.
It's a trial. We'll do it for a few years. If for some reason we decide, holy cow, this is the future, we'll do another one. But again, it's
Yeah.
you got to get it right. Because all eyes are on you in sports,
Totally.
so it's you can't rush these things, and you have to find the right location. And Vegas is kind of
Yeah.
arguably a perfect location to do it, and for the F1 brand. So my guess is that they stick with the current model how it is now.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's been fun to watch Vegas as sort of an incubator in a sense for them for different ideas, especially as they try to go a little bit more direct to fan. Like they've been selling their own merch at Vegas because they can. And they, I think, trialed an LVMH proof of concept in 2023. And now it's rolling out to the entire sport, like globally. And so I think it's been fun to see how they've used Vegas as a little bit as a test ground for other things that they want to do going forward. And it's a great marketing tool to your point. But yeah, it's hard to argue the incredibly reliable revenue streams from these race promoter contracts because there's nothing really like it. So F1 makes money in several ways. We've talked about some of it, the race promoter fees, but it also gets a lot of money from media rights, from sponsorship deals. Do you see any of those three revenue streams as particularly compelling when it comes to future growth?
Great question. I think they all have upside, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
What is great about F1 is, of course, because it's a global property, so every market is interested. So if the German market has a downturn, and maybe our next rights fee in Germany might be off because the market's tough, but holy cow, the U.S. economy is booming now. I know we live in a somewhat largely integrated world where economies move together, but different markets are performing very differently at any different time, and media companies are performing in very different ways at any given time. So if you think about the NFL, which is the top dog in terms of media, but it all comes from the United States. I mean,
Yeah.
the media revenue outside the United States, very, very small.
Yeah.
The NBA is in a much better place in terms of being able to monetize its product outside the U.S. from a media standpoint, because it's played in basketball's played in every single country in the world, and the NBA's fan base runs through every single country in the world, basically. So I think media, from that sense, is well protected, and sponsorship. Again, if the economy goes south globally, we have a global recession. One of the first things that gets cut is sponsor marketing budgets. So
Yeah.
I mean that is always a risk, because it's an easy line item to cut back on, because
Yeah.
you don't necessarily want to start firing people right off the bat, but you can trim your marketing spend and media spend very easily. Now, big properties that have a lot of pricing ability and can pick and choose from sponsorships. So that's why they want to lock in long-term deals as much as possible, because much like the race fees, it sets you up with contractually obligated income that is great. And if you're a public company, Wall Street really likes that. They like
Wall
that.
Street loves that.
They love that revenue certainty being locked in, and so there's no
Yeah.
surprises from that standpoint. So again, all three super important for the league, or for the series, and I would argue all three still have upside.
Yeah.
But they're all three have potential risks too. No different than most businesses.
Yeah.
But the sports business, it's funny. We talk about this a bit. a lot. I mean, less so now, but a few years ago, a lot in terms of these businesses are they're traditionally all thought of kind of as live sport businesses. It's people showing up to watch sports. And during COVID, when people could not show up and watch it, people thought, "Oh my gosh, it's the end. These all
Yeah.
these properties they're screwed." Like now, again, you didn't have the people that showed up. They couldn't come, for a while, or they had to go to reduce capacity at these different places. But people tuned in like crazy to all these events because sports is one of those properties that people just don't want to do without.
Yeah.
And then as soon as people could start showing back up at things, they came back bigger than ever. People just said, "Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, I can't believe miss live events for a year or 2 years, or depending where you are." And the attendance at most sporting events has just been off the charts. Now
Yeah.
teams are getting better, leagues are getting better, race series are getting better in terms of how they use data and how they tap a fan on his shoulder or her shoulder, saying, "We got a race coming up in your area," or "You want to buy this jersey," or the
Yeah.
fanatics model of just data, 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 and we're just going to cultivate all this data we have to just um, monetize our fans. But they
Yeah.
still have so much room. I mean, they have these leagues and teams have so much more runway in terms of monetizing their fan base. It's again, it's the tech model of Amazon, Apple, Google. It's just
Yes.
we're just going to hit you from every angle, and you don't even realize that we're making money off of you right now, but we are.
But so that's one thing I'm curious about, because if I were sitting at a league in their corporate office, I feel like I would be worried about the way that fan behavior is changing when it comes to watching sports. I think live events probably are doing better than ever, but people are not necessarily sitting down to watch 2-hour live games or live races at home. Like they're on social media, they're watching highlights, they're following their favorite athletes on social media. How, as a league, do you monetize that value? Because I feel like I would be existentially worried that social media companies are kind of capturing the attention of these fans in a way that's undermining my big media rights deals with ESPN or Fox or whatever it may be. Like, how do leagues kind of stop the bleeding of the social media
It's
phenomenon?
it's yeah, it's a great question, and they're all. I mean, it's all front of mind for all of them right now. And having two teenage boys and watching how they consume sports,
Yeah.
like they don't. They'll sit down and watch an NFL game, and they're both big Yankee fans, so they'll watch like a whole Yankee game. But otherwise, it's just consuming snippets on TikTok, YouTube, whatever.
Yeah.
It's just snippets of things. Lots of highlights. Um, so there's a few things going on here, and it's very. We talked about the NBA before, and people look at the NBA and they think, like, people don't watch necessarily a lot of NBA games live, start
Mm.
to finish, but it is a very digestible content in short form.
Yeah.
Highlight here, highlight there. So you can monetize that through sponsorships and just in terms of who has access to those rights, because
Hmm.
and you're not supposed to just pull them and throw them on Twitter. I mean,
But so many people do,
so
which
many
is
people
hard
do,
to,
and the
yeah.
NBA and all these leagues are walking such a fine line because they want the engagement and the conversation, and you don't want to be going after people for violating copyright. But you also have to look at it reasonably. High content. If it's Bleacher Report or Turner Sports or whoever it is, that those people you have to be like, yeah, no, you can't do that. They're not coming after
Yeah.
me if I just pull a clip from somewhere and share it around. But
Yeah.
so there is a way to value that, and that's what the NBA has a time problem in terms of people watching their games when you look at Europe or Asia, because they're all at night, so that
Yeah.
does not translate to Europe or Asia at all. But so how they want to monetize it though is this kind of short form. version of it. And so it's no, F1's recognizing the attention span, people running shorter races. I mean, it's,
Yeah. Or they'll do the F1, they'll package it as the F1 race in 30 or whatever it may be, but they're owning that
yep,
content
yeah. You
is
you
important.
have to find new ways to deliver it. It's
Yeah.
the phrase "go fish where the fishes are." That's it. That's why do deals with YouTube and then do deals with TikTok.
Yeah.
And it's we need to take our content to where the people are consuming content. So it's
Yeah.
not on NBC. Everything's not on NBC, CBS, Fox, and ABC anymore. That's, we moved to cable and people were digesting
Yeah.
it then. And now this is just the next iteration of how people are going to take in content. And so the value, though, is because so few people, because you do still have people watching live, those rights are so valuable from a sponsorship standpoint and advertiser standpoint because literally it's the only place you can get somebody to watch a commercial.
Yeah. It's true.
And so that still makes even though that live game audience might be down, again, forgetting the NFL because it doesn't go down in the NFL, but everywhere else down dramatically because the reality is you just have many fewer people that can watch because there's half as many people that have cable or
Yeah.
access to linear television. So naturally, ratings are going to go down by that much. But it is still extremely valuable for sponsors.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting conversation right now in the F1 world because ESPN's deal in the US is up this year and they're negotiating now. And so I wonder, I mean, I think streaming platforms will definitely have a seat at the table in terms of the negotiations, whether that's Netflix, Amazon, Apple, etc. How do you see F1's media rights landscape evolving? I mean, they're aware, I'm sure, of this live trend going down. But at the same time, to your point, it's incredibly valuable. F1 has traditionally been pretty conservative when it comes to broadcasting and media rights. So I don't know if I expect a big change in the way that happens over the next couple of years, but there are certainly upsides to partnering with these streaming platforms. So how do you think F1 is thinking about that decision?
I I I would just echo what you said. They are no
Yeah.
doubt talking to streamers and have to be a little leery of leaving ESPN because I think ESPN has been a very valuable partner. Now, ratings after massive uptick have been relatively flat over the last few years, but flat's kind of good right
Yeah.
now. When you think about cable linear TV. And so, and what we have seen, whether most recently with the NBA last year, people are going down both paths. They want to stick with the ESPNs of the world, but they also want to do a deal with Netflix or Amazon. Because if you look at just the raw numbers, the number of people that have a Netflix just hit 300 million people. ESPN does not reach 300 million
No.
people.
Now, ESPN's audience is probably much more concentrated in terms of who F1 is looking for, but you can't argue the scale
Yes,
of
yes,
Netflix.
and same with Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
Now that you already have a subscription to Amazon Prime, and I can tune in and watch Thursday Night Football now. Now MLS, which we're working on our MLS valuations right now, they were one of the original, probably they were the first big league really to go full time streaming only, which were 98% streaming only outside of a handful of
Yeah.
their games. And there's with Apple TV, of course, and but it's a different animal where you need a subscription to access the MLS games. So it's not, I have Apple TV, great, I can watch MLS now. No. Again, you get a few games, but if you really want to watch MLS, then you need an MLS subscription to access it. So that is a challenge that MLS is dealing with right now. But I would think with F1, we'll certainly have conversations with both, and in terms of maximizing your scale and your audience, there's got to be a way to do a deal with both of them. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about Vegas as a test ground. They own that race. They should do a live partnership with Netflix or Amazon or Apple or something for that race and test it out.
they got to do something. Now
Yeah.
NASCAR for a long time has split their rights. Between it's vary, but for Fox and NBC for a long time, and so that they have to figure out what the model works, because you want people to be able to find, not have to worry like,
Yeah.
oh, is this race Amazon or is this ESPN? You need some level of consistency. So whether it's splitting the
Yeah.
calendar, or all my as we've seen with the NFL, all the games are going to be all the races are going to be on ESPN, and we're going to have two races, whatever,
Yeah.
on Amazon, and that's how this cycle of contracts go. And you see how it works.
Yeah.
Amazon. I mean, listen, Amazon is going all in. I mean, they've done the NFL, they've done NBC, they're adding soccer, they've done soccer. Like they have aggressively leaned into sports. Netflix, not so much, but they're doing so. Netflix makes sense because they're doing do the one-off
Mm.
football game. They have not committed to the full-on. We want regular
Yeah.
sports programming. They want boxing match, the one-off programming that's going to get people to sign up.
Yeah. But what's good about what Netflix did with Christmas game day is they proved to the NFL that they can do it and that they can handle that scale. So I think that in and of itself is a great
It's
takeaway.
huge. Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
absolutely. At this point, Apple, I think, certainly when MLS signed their Apple deal, a lot of people thought Apple would have leaned in much harder into sports and
Yeah.
created a full on, brand of just a whole ecosystem of sports content on Apple TV, but they haven't as much as they
Yeah.
want. But Netflix and Amazon are both taking different paths, but both are committed to sports properties.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Netflix, it's hard to have a conversation about F1 growth and not talk about Drive to Survive. I know you mentioned it's not just Drive to Survive, and there are other things, whether that's the cost cap or whatnot. But do you feel like the impact of Drive to Survive is overblown? Is it justified? And how does F1 ensure that the fans that it's brought in through that show are here for the long term and turn into motorsport race watchers rather than just kind of in and around the periphery of the culture of the sport?
Yeah, I think it is overblown, and I think it is justified. I think it's both. I think both answers are right.
Yeah.
And I don't think you need to convert every Drive to Survive person into a hardcore race fan. I think, again, the way sports are set up now, it's okay to just bring in them as
Yeah.
casual participants in F1. They don't need to be, watching every single Sunday morning and going, I'm going to 3 races this year, or whatever, which would be expensive. But I think they can. It helps with both. I mean, one of my closest friends, he watches every single race. I was like, really? Again, like suburban New
There are only
Jersey.
24 of them.
So, no, I get that, but like, it's suburban 50-something-year-old guy and never watched a race before F1, before
Wow.
Drive to Survive, and he's now all in. Went to
Yeah.
Miami last
I
year,
mean,
like he's all in.
I started watching Drive to Survive in 2020 probably, and I couldn't have told you the difference between NASCAR and F1 before I pressed episode 1 of that show. And now I've dedicated every waking minute of my free time to this sport and talk about every single race. And
So,
yeah, I mean,
you are proof.
it's had a magical effect on me and my life, but I recognize that, that doesn't need to be everyone. They don't necessarily need to be watching every single race, but what I do think doesn't get enough credit is a lot of people say, oh, the Drive to Survive fans that came into the sport aren't interested in the racing. They're not interested in any of the technology or engineering. Like, I think that's a fallacy. I think a lot of people found it to be a gateway to the sport. And of course, you have people who are not going to sit down and watch a race and care more about the personalities and the drama. But I think it would be a mistake to categorize the Drive to Survive era of fans as people who only want one thing or only care about one thing.
I couldn't agree more. And I think gateway is a great way. I mean, everybody needs a gateway into a sport.
Yeah.
Nobody just all of a sudden is a diehard fanatic and knows everything about a sport. I mean, that's not the way it goes. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
you need an introduction into a sport, and for a lot of people, Drive to Survive was certainly it.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's a great note to end on. Kurt, thank you so much for the conversation. This was incredible for me. I learned a lot, and I'm sure our listeners will as well. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I've had fun.